The evening sun was sinking low over Atlanta, washing the streets in gold as Jamal Richardson guided his brand-new car out of the dealership. He could hardly believe it was real. The leather smelled untouched. The screen on the dashboard lit up with soft blue glow, and the quiet hum of the electric motor felt like the sound of triumph. He had worked years for this. Years of late nights, of holding down 2 jobs while finishing his degree, of ignoring people who said he would never make it out of his old neighborhood. Now here he was, hands on the wheel of a car he had bought with his own savings, a gleaming black Tesla Model S that seemed to float over the asphalt like a dream. He told himself to breathe, to take it in. This was more than transportation. It was proof of discipline, proof of sacrifice, proof that no matter how many times the world told him he wasn't good enough, he had pushed forward. His chest swelled with pride. He tapped the steering wheel and whispered, "I did it." For a brief moment he felt invincible. He turned onto a quieter street, lined with neat lawns and white-painted fences. The kind of neighborhood where people walked golden retrievers in the evening and waved politely at each other. Jamal rolled the windows down slightly and let the cool breeze brush across his face. A song played softly from the stereo, an old track that reminded him of summer nights with his cousins. Everything felt right. Then, in the mirror, he noticed the shape of a patrol car sliding behind him. At first he thought it was nothing. Police cars drove these streets all the time. He kept his speed at the limit, made his lane changes perfectly, signaled early. He told himself not to be paranoid. Still, the cruiser didn't pass. Block after block, it stayed fixed in his mirror, shadowing his every turn. His throat tightened. He straightened in his seat, gripped the wheel at 10 and 2. He checked his speedometer again, exactly the limit. His mind ran through every possible reason. Had he rolled through a stop sign? Was a tail light out? He had just bought the car. It was flawless. There was no reason. None at all. The red and blue lights burst to life. The siren hooped once, sharp and commanding. Jamal's stomach dropped. He guided the Tesla carefully to the curb and parked. His hands rested on the wheel, palms open, fingers spread, the way his mother had drilled into him years ago. His heart was a hammer in his chest. He could feel the eyes of neighbors on him already, curtains shifting, people stepping onto porches to see what the commotion was. The door of the cruiser opened and a white officer stepped out. Broad shoulders, buzz cut, mirrored sunglasses even though the sun was nearly gone. His stride was heavy, arrogant, the kind that said the ground itself answered to him. He didn't offer a greeting. He didn't explain. He just barked, "License and registration." Jamal rolled his window down slowly, careful not to make sudden moves. "Evening, officer," he said, his voice steady though his chest was tight. "Can I ask what the problem is?" The officer tilted his head, scanning the interior of the car as if looking for something to justify his suspicion. "Problem is you in this car," he muttered, just loud enough for Jamal to hear. Jamal blinked, unsure if he had heard correctly. "I'm sorry," I said. "Hand over your license and registration. Now." With deliberate calm, Jamal reached to the glove compartment, retrieved the papers and passed them out the window. His hands shook despite his effort to steady them. The officer glanced at the license, then at Jamal, then at the Tesla. A smirk curled across his lips. "Nice ride," he said with mock admiration. "Pretty expensive for someone like you." Jamal felt the words strike like a blade. He clenched his jaw and said nothing. The officer walked around the car, running a hand along the hood as though inspecting stolen property. He leaned in close to the windows, peering inside. "Step out of the vehicle," he ordered. Jamal hesitated. "Officer, is there a reason?" "Step now." The tone carried no room for argument. Jamal unbuckled his belt, opened the door, and stepped onto the pavement. He barely had time to turn before the officer spun him around and shoved him against the side of the Tesla. The cold metal pressed against his chest. "Hands behind your back," the officer snapped. "What?" Jamal's voice cracked. "I haven't done anything." "Resisting already, huh?" the man sneered. The steel cuffs clicked shut around Jamal's wrists. The pressure bit into his skin. Across the street, more people had gathered. A woman raised her phone to record. Neighbors whispered to one another, some shaking their heads, others nodding as if this was nothing surprising. "This is a mistake," Jamal tried, his voice desperate but controlled. "That car is mine. I just bought it today. The papers are right there in the glove box. Save it." The officer cut him off. "I've heard it all before. You people always got a story." Jamal bit down on his anger so hard it hurt. He had been warned about this moment all his life. His father, his uncles, the mentors who told him the rules of survival. Don't raise your voice. Don't make sudden moves. Don't give them an excuse. Stay alive. And so, he stayed silent, even as humiliation burned through him. The officer rifled through the Tesla without permission, tossing the purchase documents aside as if they were meaningless. He spoke into his radio, reporting, "Suspect detained, possible stolen vehicle." His tone was smug, as though the matter was already decided. Jamal stood on the curb in handcuffs, a spectacle for strangers. Every second stretched longer than the last. He felt the weight of centuries pressing on his shoulders, of every time someone who looked like him had been judged guilty before a word was spoken. Finally, the officer shoved him toward the patrol car and opened the back door. Jamal stumbled inside, the cuffs digging deeper. The door slammed shut, sealing him off from the world outside. Through the window, he saw his Tesla gleaming beneath the last rays of the sun, abandoned on the side of the street, treated like stolen property. The officer slid into the driver's seat, started the engine, and spoke again into the radio. "Bringing him in now." Jamal's pulse roared in his ears. To them, he wasn't a man who had worked his way up from nothing. He wasn't someone who had earned every inch of success. To them, he was only a suspect. The cruiser rolled forward. Houses slipped by, streetlights flickered on. The city stretched out ahead. Jamal closed his eyes. The sting of humiliation burned, but beneath it something else simmered. Resolve. Determination. He whispered to himself, a promise carried on the breath of anger and pain. "This isn't the end. Not for me. Not tonight." The air inside the squad car was thick, heavy, suffocating. Jamal sat with his wrists digging into the cold bite of the handcuffs, his body rocking with every bump in the road as the police cruiser carried him farther from the spot where his dream had crumbled. He stared at the cage between himself and the officer up front, a thin metal barrier that felt like a wall between two worlds, one where he belonged, and one where he had always been told he did not. His throat ached with the words he wanted to scream, but silence felt safer. The officer hummed to himself, tapping his fingers on the wheel, smugness dripping from every movement. Every so often, he glanced at Jamal in the rearview mirror, his lips curling with something close to amusement. Jamal's stomach turned. He wondered how many times this man had done this before, how many other people had been dragged into this car simply for existing in the wrong skin, in the wrong place at the wrong time. They pulled into the precinct, fluorescent lights buzzing over cracked pavement. The cruiser stopped with a jolt, and the officer yanked Jamal out, shoving him forward. The cuffs cut deeper as he stumbled. A couple of other officers lounging outside looked up, their expressions shifting quickly to boredom, as if this was routine. As if another black man in handcuffs was just another part of the evening shift. Inside, the fluorescent lights grew harsher. The air smelled of disinfectant and old paper. A woman behind the desk raised her eyebrows as Jamal was escorted in. "Stolen vehicle?" she asked, already filling in forms. "Caught him cruising in a Tesla," the officer said with a smirk. "Didn't even bother to hide it." Jamal tried to protest. "That car is mine. The papers are in the glove box. My name is on them." But his voice was drowned out by the clicking of a keyboard. No one looked up. No one listened. He felt invisible yet exposed all at once. They took his fingerprints, his mugshot. The flash of the camera burned into his eyes, leaving him blinking in humiliation. He wanted to fight, to demand justice, but the weight of every stare around him kept him silent. The system was a machine, and right now he was just another gear caught in it. Minutes later, he was led to a holding cell. The clang of the bars echoed in his chest as they shut behind him. He sat on the cold bench, staring at the graffiti etched into the walls by countless others who had sat where he now sat. Names, dates, curses carved in desperation. He rubbed his wrists where the cuffs had dug into his skin, the marks still red and raw. Time passed slowly, measured by the faint ticking of a clock down the hall. His anger simmered beneath the surface, threatening to boil over. But alongside it grew something colder, sharper: patience. He knew who he was. He knew what power he carried, what connections he had. And he knew that when the time came, the man who had humiliated him would learn exactly how wrong he had been. The officer from earlier, Whitaker, Jamal had caught the name from the badge, returned to the cell after what felt like hours. He leaned against the bars, arms crossed, eyes gleaming with cruelty. "So, Jamal Richardson," he said mockingly, "care to tell me where you really got that car?" Jamal met his gaze, unflinching. "I bought it." Whitaker chuckled. "Sure you did. With what? A stack of counterfeit bills. Or maybe you borrowed it from one of your buddies until they noticed it missing." Jamal stayed silent. His pulse throbbed in his temples, but he forced himself to keep his composure. He knew that men like Whitaker fed off reaction. "You know," Whitaker continued, "I've been on this job for 15 years, and I can tell you 9 times out of 10, when I see a guy like you behind the wheel of a car like that, something's off. Call it instinct. Call it racism," Jamal replied calmly. For a moment, silence filled the space between them. Whitaker's smirk faltered, replaced by a flicker of rage. He leaned closer, his voice low and venomous. "Careful how you talk to me. You're not in a position to be making accusations." Jamal leaned back against the wall, folding his arms. "I'm not the one who should be worried." Whitaker narrowed his eyes, searching Jamal's face for something he couldn't quite place. Then, with a scoff, he pushed off the bars and walked away, muttering under his breath. Alone again, Jamal closed his eyes and inhaled slowly. His mind was clear now. He had let the humiliation sink in, let the rage burn through him. Now all that was left was the plan. He would make a call. One call. And the entire weight of the truth would crash down on Officer Whitaker. Hours later, as the night deepened and the precinct grew quieter, Jamal requested his phone call. The officer on duty barely looked up, just slid the handset across to him with a muttered warning about time limits. Jamal dialed a number he knew by heart. When the voice on the other end answered, Jamal spoke in a tone so calm it sent chills through the clerk sitting nearby. "It's Richardson," he said. "I've been detained. Wrongfully. I need you to send someone down here immediately." The pause on the other end was short but heavy. Then the reply came, firm, sharp, professional. "We'll handle it. Sit tight." Jamal hung up, a faint smile tugging at his lips. The wheels were in motion. Back in his cell, he sat straighter, the weight of humiliation beginning to lift. He thought about the look on Whitaker's face when he realized who exactly he had thrown into handcuffs. The thought was almost enough to make the concrete bench feel comfortable. Meanwhile, Whitaker strutted through the halls, still convinced he had done his job well. He bragged to another officer about how sharp his instincts were, how he could spot a thief from a mile away. His laughter carried down the corridor, grating against Jamal's ears. But Jamal didn't flinch, because he knew something Whitaker didn't. He knew that before this night was over, those laughs would die in his throat, and the arrogance would turn to panic. And for the first time since the red and blue lights had flashed behind him, Jamal felt something close to peace. The night inside the precinct carried a strange silence, broken only by the buzzing hum of fluorescent lights and the occasional shuffle of paperwork from the front desk. Jamal sat on the hard bench of his cell, his arms resting on his knees, his mind steady now, focused. He had made the call. It was only a matter of time. Patience was a weapon, and he intended to wield it. Whitaker's footsteps echoed down the corridor before his figure appeared again. He was eating a granola bar, crumbs scattering down his uniform. He stopped in front of the cell, chewing loudly, leaning on the bars with an air of casual dominance. "You get your phone call?" he asked mockingly. Jamal raised his head slowly. "I did." Whitaker smirked. "Let me guess, called your cousin to come bail you out? Maybe some buddy who owes you a favor?" He shook his head as if the thought amused him. "Doesn't matter. You'll be here a while. Stolen vehicles don't just clear up overnight." Jamal didn't answer. His silence made Whitaker uneasy. For the first time, the officer noticed how calm Jamal seemed, how steady his eyes were. There was no panic, no begging, no pleading. Just patience, as if he knew something Whitaker didn't. Hours passed. Midnight came and went. The precinct grew quieter, most officers heading home, leaving only a skeleton crew behind. Whitaker was one of them, his arrogance keeping him wide awake. He liked being in control of situations like this, liked watching men crumble in the silence of their cells. But Jamal wasn't crumbling. He was waiting. And then, just past 1 in the morning, the glass doors at the front of the station slid open. 3 men walked in, their presence immediately shifting the air. Suits, crisp and dark, badges glinting under the harsh lights. Their movements carried authority, not the forced swagger of Whitaker but the effortless confidence of men who knew the ground they stood on belonged to them. The desk clerk looked up, startled, and quickly stood. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" she asked nervously. The tallest of them, a black man with a clean-shaven head and sharp eyes, held out his badge. His voice was low, even, but carried weight that filled the room. "Special Agent Marcus Hale, FBI. We're here for Jamal Richardson." The clerk blinked, stunned. "FBI? Yes," Hale replied, his gaze unwavering. "We need him released immediately." The name spread through the precinct like a spark through dry leaves. Whispers carried down the hallway. Whitaker, sitting at his desk with a cup of coffee, nearly choked when he heard it. He hurried to the front, trying to piece together what was happening. "Excuse me," Whitaker interrupted, approaching the group. "This man Richardson, he's in on suspicion of grand theft auto. I brought him in myself." Hale turned his head slowly, his eyes locking onto Whitaker. The look was enough to freeze the officer in place. "You made the arrest?" "That's right," Whitaker said, puffing his chest. "Caught him red-handed in a Tesla. Vehicle didn't match the driver. My instincts told me." "Your instincts?" Hale cut in, his voice slicing through Whitaker's arrogance like a blade. "Do you have a warrant? Did you confirm stolen property reports? Or did you assume a black man driving a luxury car must have stolen it?" The words landed like hammer blows. Whitaker stammered, searching for footing. I had probable cause." Hale stepped closer, towering over him now. "Probable cause? Or prejudice? Do you have any idea who you've put in a cell tonight?" Whitaker's mouth opened, but no words came. Hale didn't wait. He signaled to one of the other agents, who immediately moved toward the holding cells. Within minutes, Jamal was escorted out, the cuffs removed, his dignity restored piece by piece. He stood tall, his suit slightly wrinkled from hours on the bench, but his composure flawless. When his eyes met Whitaker's, he didn't need to speak. The silence carried the weight of the truth. The entire room seemed to shrink as Hale addressed the officers gathered. "Jamal Richardson is one of our agents. He has been undercover for months on a federal operation that your officer here nearly jeopardized with his reckless behavior. Do you understand the consequences of what you've done tonight?" Gasps and murmurs rippled through the precinct. The desk clerk looked pale, the other officers avoided eye contact. Whitaker's face drained of color, sweat beading at his temple. "Wait!" he blurted out, desperation cracking his voice. He didn't tell me who he was. How was I supposed to know?" "It wasn't your job to know," Hale replied coldly. "It was your job to follow the law. Something you failed to do the moment you decided his skin color was probable cause." The silence that followed was suffocating. Whitaker shifted on his feet, his bravado crumbling. He tried to laugh, to defuse the weight of the accusation. "Come on, this is just a misunderstanding. No harm done." Jamal finally spoke, his voice calm but cutting. No harm? You shoved me against my own car. You handcuffed me in front of a crowd. You locked me in a cell like a criminal. And you want to call it a misunderstanding? Whitaker looked at him, but there was no defense left to give. Agent Hale turned back to the clerk. We'll be filing an official report with Internal Affairs and the Department of Justice. This precinct will cooperate fully. And as for Officer Whitaker, Hale paused, letting the silence drag. Expect consequences. Jamal adjusted his jacket, straightened his shoulders, and walked toward the exit with the agents at his side. Every eye in the room followed him, some wide with guilt, others with quiet respect. For once, the power dynamics had shifted. The man they had dismissed, humiliated, underestimated. He was the one walking free, while the officer who had chained him now stood shackled by his own arrogance. As the glass doors closed behind them, Whitaker stood frozen, his world unraveling around him. For the first time, he realized that his badge couldn't shield him from accountability. Not tonight, not after this. And Jamal, stepping into the cool night air, breathed deeply. The sting of injustice still lingered, but so did the satisfaction of knowing the tables had begun to turn. Karma had taken its first step, and it was only the beginning. The morning sun crept slowly through the blinds of Whitaker's small apartment, though he hadn't slept enough to notice. His eyes burned from the restless hours he'd spent pacing, replaying the night before in his head. Every detail echoed. Hale's cold stare, Jamal's calm words, the gasps from the officers around him when the truth had dropped like a thunderclap. He had thought his badge would shield him, that it was untouchable. But now the shield felt thin, brittle, cracking. His phone buzzed on the table. It was a message from the precinct captain. Internal Affairs will be conducting an inquiry into your arrest of Richardson. Be available for questioning at noon. Don't leave town. The words punched harder than he expected. Don't leave town. He muttered it under his breath like some kind of warning meant for criminals, not officers. He rubbed his face, forcing the thought away, but it lingered like a stain he couldn't wash off. By the time noon came, Whitaker sat stiffly in a sterile office across from two men in suits. Internal Affairs officers. Their questions were sharp, methodical, leaving no room for excuses. Did you verify the vehicle as stolen before making the arrest? Whitaker swallowed. No, but did Mr. Richardson display any aggressive or suspicious behavior prior to being detained? No, but I had reason to. Reason to what? Reason to assume. The officer's tone was icy. You detained a federal agent without probable cause. You humiliated him in public, used unnecessary force, and failed to follow proper protocol. Do you deny this? The room closed in around Whitaker, his jaw clenched, sweat sliding down the back of his neck. For once, there were no jokes, no smirks to hide behind. The silence after each question left him naked, cornered. Meanwhile, across the city, Jamal sat at a polished oak desk in the FBI field office. He wore a fresh suit, his badge gleaming beside a thick folder of reports. Agent Hale stood across from him, arms crossed, his face serious but respectful. You handled yourself well last night, Hale said. Not everyone would have kept their composure after what happened. Jamal exhaled, his fingers tightening around the pen in his hand. I didn't have a choice. If I'd reacted the way he expected me to, I'd be the one painted as violent. And the story would have ended differently. Hale nodded slowly. You're right, but that patience gave us leverage. Now, Internal Affairs has everything they need to tear his career apart. And you, Hale leaned in, lowering his voice. You've just become the face of something bigger than yourself. Do you realize that? Jamal looked up, meeting his superior's gaze. I never wanted to be anyone's symbol. I just wanted to do my job. But if my experience can expose what's been happening, if it can shake the system even a little, then maybe it's worth it. Later that evening, a video began circulating online. Someone at the precinct had recorded the confrontation. Whitaker bragging at the desk, the agents storming in, Jamal walking out free while the officer stammered in disbelief. The clip spread across social media like wildfire. Hashtags erupted. Driving while black. Profiling exposed. Karma served. For the first time, the humiliation wasn't Jamal's. It was Whitaker's. He saw the clip himself, sitting in the dark of his apartment, his face illuminated by the glow of his laptop. Every comment cut deeper. People he'd never met dissected his arrogance, mocked his posture, tore apart the smirk he had worn with pride. They called him exactly what he had tried to deny being, a racist cop abusing his power. The phone rang again. It was his captain. The voice on the other end was sharp, impatient. "You've made us a target, Whitaker. The department's drowning in bad press because of you. We can't cover this up. You're suspended without pay until further notice." The line went dead before Whitaker could answer. His stomach twisted. The room felt smaller, the walls pressing in. He was losing everything: status, paycheck, respect. All because of one decision, one moment where he let bias drive his actions. Across town, Jamal walked into a neighborhood cafe where the scent of coffee and baked bread warmed the air. A couple of locals recognized him from the video. An older woman at the counter smiled gently. "I saw what happened, son. Proud of the way you carried yourself. My grandson watched it too. Told me you gave him hope." Jamal's throat tightened. Hope. It was a heavy word, heavier than he wanted to carry. But it meant something. He nodded respectfully. "Thank you, ma'am." As he sat with his coffee, he reflected on the irony. He had spent years working undercover, dismantling organized crime, infiltrating dangerous groups, risking his life in the shadows. Yet the moment that made him most visible, the moment that put his name on everyone's lips, wasn't a sting operation or a headline arrest. It was simply existing while black, being mistaken for a criminal because of prejudice. The thought gnawed at him, but it also fueled him. If people were paying attention now, maybe he could do something with it. Maybe his story could push the needle even a fraction toward change. Whitaker, meanwhile, couldn't escape. Reporters camped outside the precinct, shouting his name, cameras flashing. Neighbors whispered when he left his apartment. His reputation bled away faster than he could grasp it. And in the privacy of his own mind, the gnawing question wouldn't leave. What if he hadn't been FBI? What if it was just another black man? Would anyone have believed him then? For the first time, the question unsettled him. Not because he cared for justice, but because the answer revealed how fragile his own protection was. He had thought power was permanent. Now he saw how quickly it could turn, how easily the system that shielded him could spit him out. The night grew late. Jamal sat at his desk again, finishing paperwork for the operation he had been working on before all this erupted. His phone buzzed. A message from Hale: "Be ready. The media wants your side of the story. We'll brief you tomorrow." Jamal leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. He hadn't chosen this fight, but it had chosen him. And as tired as he was, he knew it wasn't over. The storm was only beginning. Weeks passed, and the storm did not quiet. What began as a single video had ignited conversations across the country. News outlets replayed the footage of Whitaker's smug arrest contrasted with the moment the FBI walked Jamal out of the precinct. Commentators debated systemic racism, police accountability, and how easily prejudice could strip a man of dignity. For Jamal, it was overwhelming. His name was suddenly everywhere. His face recognized in places he had once been invisible. He could no longer buy coffee without someone stopping to thank him, or open his phone without seeing his story dissected by strangers. Agent Hale had warned him this would happen. The Bureau had tried to shield him, but the story had taken a life of its own. Invitations poured in: interviews, panels, community events. Some saw him as a hero, others as a symbol. He wrestled with both roles, unsure he wanted either, but he couldn't deny the impact. When he stood before a high school auditorium filled with young black students and saw their eyes light up as he spoke, he realized his experience had become more than personal. It was a mirror reflecting the struggle of many, and his voice carried weight now. Whitaker's life unraveled in parallel. His suspension turned into termination after Internal Affairs completed their investigation. The report was damning. Unlawful arrest, racial profiling, excessive use of force. It recommended not only his dismissal but also his inclusion on a federal list that barred him from ever working in law enforcement again. The badge he had once worn like armor was stripped away, leaving him exposed. He sat in a small courtroom weeks later, no longer the man in uniform but a defendant in civilian clothes, as Jamal and Agent Hale testified. The irony gnawed at him. He had once enjoyed watching men squirm under questioning. Now it was his turn. The prosecutor's voice rang clear. This case is not just about one man's mistake. It is about abuse of authority rooted in prejudice. Officer Whitaker's actions reflect a pattern that must be addressed. Whitaker lowered his head. The cameras in the room caught every grimace, every twitch of regret that crossed his face. Outside, protesters held signs, some calling for justice, others demanding systemic reform. His name had become shorthand for everything broken in the system. Jamal's testimony was steady, measured. He did not raise his voice or seek revenge. He simply told the truth. How he had been profiled, humiliated, locked in a cell for existing while black. His words carried more power than anger could. They painted a picture of quiet resilience that silenced the room. The verdict was clear. Whitaker was guilty of misconduct and excessive force. He was sentenced to probation, community service, and mandatory racial bias training. For him, it was humiliating. For the public, it was a rare glimpse of accountability. But the true punishment was not the sentence. It was the life that followed. Whitaker became a pariah. Neighbors avoided him. Former colleagues cut ties. Job applications were rejected the moment his name surfaced. He worked odd jobs under the table, struggling to rebuild a life stripped of authority. Every time he passed a television or opened a phone, he risked seeing his own downfall replayed, his smirk immortalized as the face of racial bias caught on camera. Jamal, on the other hand, found a new path. Though he continued his work as an FBI agent, he also became an advocate. He spoke at universities, joined panels on reform, and lent his voice to initiatives aimed at holding law enforcement accountable. He never sought fame, but he understood the responsibility it carried. People listened when he spoke not just because he was an agent, but because he had lived the injustice firsthand and stood tall through it. One evening, months after the trial, Jamal returned to the same cafe where the older woman had once told him her grandson found hope in him. The boy was there this time, shy but eager, holding out a notebook for Jamal to sign. "Thank you," the boy said softly. "I want to be like you someday. Not scared. Not silent." Jamal smiled, signing the notebook with steady hands. "Don't be like me," he said gently. "Be better. Speak louder. Demand more. That's how change happens." As he left the cafe, the city lights reflected on the sleek black Tesla parked outside. This time, there were no flashing police lights, no shouts, no humiliation. Just a man walking to his car, free to enjoy the simple pride of what he had earned. Whitaker, across town, sat alone in his dim apartment, scrolling through endless news feeds filled with Jamal's speeches, his influence growing. The man he had once tried to break had become unbreakable, his story echoing far beyond what Whitaker could have imagined. The irony was cruel but fitting. The very act of discrimination meant to reduce Jamal had elevated him instead. Karma had completed its circle. For Jamal, the scars of that night would never fully fade. But they had become more than wounds. They were a call to action, a reminder that dignity was worth defending and justice worth fighting for. And though he never asked to be a symbol, he carried that weight with quiet strength, knowing others walked taller because of it. And for Whitaker, every morning began with the same bitter taste. The knowledge that his downfall was his own making, that the world had seen him for what he was, and that no badge would ever hide it again. In the end, two men walked out of that night forever changed. One, stripped of power and consumed by his prejudice. The other, strengthened by resilience, carrying not just his own story but the hope of many. And as Jamal drove through the quiet streets, the engine humming softly, he thought of the simple truth his grandmother once told him: "Treat others how you want to be treated." He had lived it. Whitaker had ignored it. The difference between them was clear, and the world would not forget.